The more you prepare, the more you are able to explain to others what you bring to the table through your knowledge, your values, and your skills, the more confidence you gain. And then the more you can advocate for yourself. So it's not one or the other. You either prepare, it's kind of both together simultaneously.
I'm so excited to chat today, Rosie. I want to make sure that we focus in on how women, especially, can develop themselves into leaders and advance their career. It can be especially daunting when you're in the early stages of your career and you're not sure how to develop yourself, who to turn to, where to go. I've been there. My career has taken different pivots and turns and in all the best of ways, but I would not be at this position that I'm in now without some wonderful leaders in my life and folks who came alongside and guided me when I needed it. And you are doing that for others. Before we dive into all that wonderful stuff and what you are doing, I want to hear about your background so our audience gets to know you. So, Rosie, please share your journey and what has brought you in this space.
Well, first of all, thank you, Rebecca, for having me. I'm excited to talk about anytime that we talk about career development for women. I'm always very excited and very motivated to share. So, I come from the property and casualty insurance industry. I was there for 32 years. I just left a couple of years ago. But during the time that I was going up the ladder, number one, there was a pivotal moment, and we can share about that, where I figured out that I was holding myself back. And then once I was able to step into leadership and I was onboarding people, I shifted from an individual contributor as an underwriter to management, and then later on, learning and development head for the underwriting team. And I noticed that new hires that were college graduates, we would hire them as a cohort. And it was always the young guys that were asking and answering questions first. And the young women, it was always like they were shy, they were introverted, they were not asking and answering those questions. And that, and I saw that like 2 or 3 years in a row. And I'm like, okay, I need to do this. I need to do something about this. So I would pull these young women aside and be like, hey, you need to speak up, you need to advocate, all that good stuff. And so when I was in this leadership position, I could see it more as a macro where women were naturally and automatically holding themselves back simply by not being intentional on how to navigate their careers. They would leave their career on autopilot. And that's, again, what happened to me. That was part of my story. I was 40 years old and I had gone through a 4 year long, very contentious divorce. So all of my energy was focused on that. Once that was settled, I was able to then refocus on my career because now I had two little kids to take care of. So I needed to make more money. So I had to focus on my career. And one day I was just waiting and waiting and waiting for people to notice my hard work. Nobody ever did. And that's when I went and I asked and I received. So that's just a little bit about my journey. And I largely do what I do today from everything that I observed in the corporate world, from an individual contributor, my own mistakes and errors, and then from a macro perspective of others.
Love that, Rosie. I love you sharing that story of how you started noticing it in the women around you. I credit actually one of my first college classes, which was a while ago now, but my professor, who also was my advisor, wonderful professor, wonderful human being, he requested and basically required everybody to bring a topic from the newspaper into class and be ready to speak to it. And you also had to, if you had anything to share, you had to at least have one thing to share about the topic that the class was on. Me being a little bit more, I've discovered I'm more of an ambivert, but thinking I was more of an introvert at the time, I wasn't always inclined to be that person that spoke up. I was satisfied with being a listener and taking everything in that was happening in class. And I was sort of forced to start exercising that voice. And then over the years, gradually exercising more and more. and now I have a podcast. So
Yeah.
I don't know if that tells you anything, but no, all of that said, I love listening to my guests more too, but I share that in addition to say that it can be very hard for us and it might not be our natural inclination, but something that I too had to learn over the years that it is important to have a voice and speak up. And then once you realize that for yourself, you need to help encourage and coach others on the importance of that and how to exercise that in a healthy way as well. So I share all that to say I appreciate that. And I appreciate the work that you're doing around that because it is so important. And I also see the challenges for folks in a remote situation
Yes.
where it's, I don't want to say that it's necessarily harder, but the challenges are different. And so people might feel it's easier to hide in a remote situation too. I don't know if you coach folks in the differences as well.
Absolutely. And it's so interesting too, because a lot of that also has to do with younger people coming into the corporate world. And as you well know, now younger people, they will do anything and everything to not make a phone call. And I know that because I have a 24 and a 26-year-old, and they're like, oh, mom, I'll just do it online. I'm like, just call. And they're like, no, why am I going to call? I don't want to call. I don't want to talk to people. So yes, and I have one of my clients that is working towards just feeling comfortable showing up on camera. So all of those things, I think a lot of that is largely how people have grown up with that technology and you're always hiding behind your phone. And so that is something that once you are aware, it does take a little bit of a learning curve and courage to be visible and put yourself out there in the professional sense.
Do you ever find, or when you're helping coach people, is there a nuance to how to exercise your voice and how you're framing your conversations? I share that and I'll give some context behind the question. I've experienced, and I won't say that folks are necessarily early in their career, but folks who are either early in their career or never learned how and what to say in a conversation either amongst a group or with their boss or supervisor, and it might be a little bit void of tact, or it can come off in a certain way that isn't conducive to collaboration. And yet I like to give people the benefit of the doubt that the intention is there and that they mean well, but maybe they're exercising their voice and they're not really speaking in a way that is helpful and collaborative. I'll put it that way.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And part of that, so I coach a lot of women to be promotion ready. And so what that means is to do all the tools and the exercises. So get your resume done, get your LinkedIn done, but more than anything, be prepared for the interview, the conversation, the performance review. And the way I coach them to do that is by number one, creating a story vault. So it's like 10 accomplishments and putting them into a framework that is a very conversational story. But the second piece to that is crafting their script. And crafting their script is having, and I just was coaching somebody on Monday and they're in a management position. They're like, what do I do if someone comes in and they're like, I have a question, but I have a meeting to go to. And I'm like, okay, this is what you do. You say, I can give you 2 minutes now, or I can give you 15 minutes at 3 o'clock. And so and by what I mean by crafting your script is having 5 or 10 phrases that you have as canned phrases. Another thing, she said her manager had given her some feedback and she was taken aback. And the manager was like, well, are you upset? And she was like, no, but she was upset. And so instead of saying no, it's like, you know what? Let me put my thoughts together and I'll come back to you. Another thing, when someone is being brusque or, abrupt in a meeting and you're taken back, you're like, I'm not really sure what you meant by that, but can you please elaborate? So it's a series of canned phrases that you have at the ready so that if something like that happens, you're not caught off guard. And it totally changes the way you are operating because you're not just waiting to see if something happens, you are ready. And so the whole reason why I talk about having a roadmap, a plan, a strategy is because when that next opportunity pops up, whether it's internally or externally, you're not trying to, oh crap, I have to update my resume. What am I going to say for the interview? All those things. You are ready and you can now just apply confidently and be intentional.
That's really helpful. In marketing and operations, one of the phrases that we share a lot in my company is that templates take talent. And I think of that with the sort of canned phrases too. You have your list of go to tactful ways of either getting a little bit more clarity or transitioning out of a conversation, perhaps, or alleviating some of that tension without being disruptive, it sounds like. So I love that. Super helpful. I can imagine it takes practice. I certainly have been there myself. They might not always come to us in the moment when we're feeling that pressure. But I do want to segue to the readiness and preparedness. That's something that I like to encourage in the team members that I work with at my work, but also something that I work with when it comes to my mentees and how they're preparing for whatever the next opportunity might be. And so sometimes what I've run into, not all the time, but sometimes I've run into folks who are excited for the next opportunity, and yet there's a resistance to putting in the work that will help prepare them and get them there. And when I say that, I'll give a little bit of a qualifier caveat as well, that I don't believe that you should exhaust yourself or burn out for the sake of something that might not be a guarantee or might not be on the immediate horizon. I think there's slow, steady, constant, consistent progress. That Kaizen idea is more helpful and more sustainable. At the same time, what you're saying also kind of rings true and resonates, that we get caught up in the scramble of trying to be ready for something last minute when we might have been preparing for that a lot earlier and a lot sooner if we'd been making smaller, steady, bite-sized progress. So I say all that to say, long story long, when you are working with folks who are hungry for that next step and they're ready for it, but they're not ready to put the work in, or that they feel like, based on maybe tenure, or maybe it is not just tenure at a company, but their tenure in the industry, they feel like it should be a given and they don't have that self-awareness or that realization of the skills, hard or soft, that they need to work on to progress to that next level.
Right. So I agree with all that. Slow and steady is perfect. One of the things that I tell my clients is like, take even 1 or 2 hours a month, and that could be on company time because you're doing it to develop yourself. So 1 or 2 hours a month, whether it's on company or on your own, to work on something, whether it's, again, your LinkedIn, crafting your script. A lot of times when people are trying to look at their career, they spend months and months and months on their resume and then not enough on showcasing how they can be the solution to somebody's problem through their talents and their skills. And the biggest downfall that women have is that we don't take the time to explain to others how we can help them solve that problem. And that is something that you and I can continually work on. But if you are not taking the time to know about yourself, to know what your skills are, to know what your talents are, how you can apply them to somebody's problem, say your team has some kind of issue and you see it, and then you can step back, you can think about it, come up with different ideas or solutions that you can help implement through your skills and your talent, then you're bringing value to that situation. And a lot of times, even though you might have the tenure and you might have the skill, if you cannot show that, it's kind of like when we were, little kids and we were doing math and you had to show your work. If you are not able to show that you can bring value, the that's where the pitfall is. Because when someone and I do a lot of coaching on putting yourself as the problem solver for somebody else and having them see that value. So imagine if we could have this situation be X and I can help by doing Y. And you start showcasing yourself as the problem solver. But, kind of like that time when I was at my desk, 40 years old, and I saw younger people getting promoted that I trained. And I'm like, what is happening? And I was a high performer. I was training people. I was backing up my manager. I was doing all the things, but nothing was happening until I actually said, hey, I'm interested. and stepping into leadership. And the answer was like, really? And I was like, what do you mean? Oh, really? And they were like, well, you never said anything. And it's one of those things that I was ready. I had the talent, I had the skill, I had the tenure, but I didn't share that with the right stakeholders. And they didn't see me as a problem solver because I wasn't saying, this is what I can do, this is how I can help, all those things.
So it's so important, Rosie, you because we're talking about two different, well, not necessarily different, but two elements to being ready for that advancement. And one is the work and effort that you put in to be valuable and to make that impact. And the other part of it is adding voice to it and also voice to what your goals are too. And so rethinking, succinctly what I've observed, it is either those folks and especially women who are value driven and driving value and problem solving, critical and creatively thinking through different challenges and not raising their voice when they're ready and want to be in that next level, that higher level. And then the other side of it, which is the folks who are not ready for what is next and think they are. It might be a Dunning-Kruger effect there taking hold too, but they're voicing that they want to be ready. It's sort of, my mind, it's the Vince Lombardi, this is a football, you got to get the basics down, right? And then later on, adding that slow but steady progress. When folks are working with you and when they're assessing, or maybe you're both assessing together what their current readiness level is, do you put that roadmap together for them in terms of what they might need to develop or areas where they might be a little bit weaker and need mitigation? How do you like to approach that with your clients?
So it's a two prong, and the way you put it is really well said. So one track per se is very tactical. So that's the resume, the story vault, the 90-day plan, all that stuff. The other track is mindset oriented. So it depends on where they are. A mindset is where you have these thoughts and ideas that nobody's ever going to promote you, that you're not good enough. You compare yourself. And I call that sabotage salad because you're like feeding yourself all this negative stuff and you're eating it and you're sabotaging yourself. And I know that there's like four real categories that people fall in where they don't feel that they're worthy or deserving. So that's the worthiness blocker. The second one is that they may not be the popular candidate, so they're not like the golden boy or golden girl. So the popularity blocker. Then the skills blocker, they feel that they have to upskill constantly, constantly, constantly before they're ready to apply. And then the last one is the visibility blocker. So a lot of the mindset that we do, we kind of fall into, generally, my clients fall into one of those four blockers. And then we have to do exercises to figure out. And it's really conversations. Like, for example, somebody said, oh, well, my little job. And I was like, whoa, hold on a second. Why did you say little job? And they were like, what are you talking about? I was like, you literally just said my little job. And she didn't even realize that she was diminishing her worth and her value by saying those words. So a lot of times, as a certified high performance coach, I try to catch that language that translates into those limiting beliefs. I just did a talk yesterday, and a lot of women are we just have, and all human beings do this, but we seem to be meaner to ourselves you wake up and you're like, oh my gosh, I have to lose 10 pounds. Oh my gosh, look at this like gray hair. Oh my gosh, like all those things. And I said to them, one of the exercises that we do in high performance coaching is we literally put your own 5-year-old self right next to you and say, would you say those mean things that you're saying to yourself every day to your 5-year-old self? And of course, the answer is no. But being aware of the thoughts and our ideas that pop into our head and just noticing them. And is it really true that I'm never going to be promoted? Well, no, because if you put in the work and if you're able to develop your mindset, chances are that you're going to be able to get promoted here or somebody is, somewhere else. So two very different tracks, but they both combine and then they make you a an individual that once you're there, you are promotion ready. So you are ready for that next opportunity, but you have to put in the work. And one of the things that women come to me and they're like, Rosie, can you just help me gain confidence so that I can go out and advocate for myself? And I'm like, I can do that, but it's through preparation, preparation, preparation. The more you prepare, the more you are able to explain to others what you bring to the table through your knowledge, your values, and your skills, the more confidence you gain. And then the more you can advocate for yourself. So it's not one or the other. You either prepare, it's kind of both together simultaneously.
There's so much that I wish we had like hours, Rosie, because there's so much to unpack with that, and it resonates so much with me and what I've heard from others too. Part of the resistance that I've seen, and I use that, I don't want to make that a blanket term, but the resistance or the lack of clarity and maybe overwhelm in not knowing how to move forward can also come from, and this way I think it's a little bit to do with confidence too, but the sort of idea that they want to get to the next level, which means a different kind of work. And it might mean higher responsibility and higher level thinking and work responsibility, or it might be higher volume of work that you're now more capable of handling because you have the experience to back it up. And at the same time, not everybody gets to showcase that they're ready for that through the work that they're doing. And so there's a little bit of, well, how do I show that I can do the work without already doing the job? And I question it and I wonder about it because I've been that person that does the job of the next level
Mhm.
and then has gotten the promotion for it. And I know that that's not always possible or preferable. And I wouldn't necessarily encourage other people to just go and do your boss's job, right?
Yeah.
So I say all that to say, like, how do we navigate and compromise between I want to be doing this next level work, I can't take that on and my current job. So where's the happy medium and how do I prove and show that I'm ready, which in turn would then prove to myself and give me that confidence that I can do it too.
Well, I think that's one of the blockers that pops up. So to me, that kind of falls into the visibility blocker because you want to be visible. So what I did, and by the way, everything that I have my clients do, I did in my career, and I know it works because I eventually got to become an executive vice president. And so one of the things that I did when I had that first initial conversation with that executive vice president that said, I was 40 and I'm like, hey, I want to step into leadership. Within 4 months or so, I stepped into leadership, and it was just a great timing because somebody left and I was a candidate and I interviewed and I was the best qualified person for that. So 3 years into my management position, I was like, I know I want to do something bigger. I know I want to do like impact the organization. And what I did is I started campaigning for me. And I started talking to as many senior leaders that would listen from my department, other departments, and say, hey, you know what? I'm not ready yet, but I want you to know that I want to do something bigger, something better. How did you do it? And what advice can you give me? And from each of those conversations, Rebecca, I got a little golden nugget that I could apply to my career. And then it took me another 2 years to really be ready. This a home office position opened up, and uh, it took like 4 or 5 months to get it all approved and up and running. They interviewed, and I always love to tell this story because I was one of 10 candidates, and there were 4 senior executives that were interviewing, and I was the unanimous choice. But the reason I say that is because I was not the smartest person, but I was the most prepared person because I was stepping into a promotion within the organization. So I created a plan for myself, like a 90-day plan stepping into the role. I created a succession plan for the person that was coming into my role. I was doing all kinds of things. I got recommendation letters from people within the organization. And of course, I had my brother-in-law interview me, my sister interview me. I bought that book, What Color is My Parachute, that they publish every single year. I did every exercise in that book. And I was able to tell these senior executives how I would be the best person to solve their problem through the skills that I had, but it's because I did all that preparation work. And I'm by no means telling people that you have to be that extreme, because my husband was like, "You're like a dog with a bone, like all you do is like you're so focused." But I knew that was my job, and I was bound and determined to prove it. So it was a visibility thing that I was going for, but at the same time, gaining knowledge through the conversations for all these people. So if there's a situation like you described, start talking to people. You may not be ready. You may not be able to do both jobs for sure, but start talking to people, put yourself out there. And that's where I went wrong the first time around, because I didn't do that. And that's when I stepped into management position, I was like, "Oh, I'm doing this so different now." I knew. And so that is what I share with women, because if you want to continue to advance, preparation, preparation, preparation. The confidence comes with it, and then you have to figure out, and I have a promotion readiness quiz that kind of showcases where you fall in one of those blockers. But once you know which blocker you need to work on and you're aware of it, then you can start taking action to break that down.
Rosie, I'd say you were smart and prepared, but maybe without assuming, maybe you mean in terms of smart, you felt like you hadn't the experience yet to back up your readiness for the position. So you had to leverage the readiness and the campaigning and approach it from that smart angle, which I think is a really great example for us. Thank you for sharing that. I actually a while ago had given advice to someone to do something similar and they started to take it and then they got the golden nuggets, as you put it, and then I don't think it was to their liking. So they stopped campaigning, and I share that to say that you might find out that the job you're looking for is not what you actually want
Hmm.
too as you're going through that process, and it might give folks some revelation and further inspiration for where their purpose and their passion truly lies too. You might also find out that the work is just not something that'll be fulfilling for you. So, going through that,
Absolutely.
yeah, it gives you, it might, you might not be practicing the work already. It gives you some clarity and context around the work that you would be doing. So either way, it's a benefit.
And you know what? I just want to say that's a fantastic point, because through that process, you learn what you want, but you also learn what you don't want, because that's just as important. So, yeah, absolutely. I agree.
Yeah, I was talking to one of my managers the other day, and they were sharing, "Yeah, I don't think the rest of the team knows how much effort and work we put into building out our onboarding and our systems for new team members joining." I said, "You're right, but they're gonna feel it. They're gonna feel the impact." And so I think about that sort of from the reverse. You know, not everybody knows what goes on at the next level and the next level. If you're in a healthy environment where your leaders are working for your benefit, not everybody knows what goes into that. So what you're describing in that advice can be really helpful in preparing someone, whether that is something they're going to pursue or not. But Rosie, you also talked about telling stories too and sharing the impact. And when it comes to sharing stories, I see a lot of folks struggle with that. And so what are some helpful frameworks or maybe guidance and advice you can give folks who maybe aren't as adept or they don't understand, how do I even compile my experience and impact and share it in story form? What does that look like?
Yeah, so what I usually have my clients do, and this works really well when you're going on an interview and you're trying to explain, how again you can share your value. So I have them identify the top 10 accomplishments that you've done throughout your career, that you have measurables, percentages, numbers, anything, that a metric that you can share that you're really proud of. Then we break each of those stories into what was the problem, what was the action, and what was the solution. And then we weave that into a very conversational, very concise 1 to 2, maybe 3 sentences, and how you can actually share it in a very conversational manner. And a lot of times people ask me, they're like, "Okay, Rosie, I can do that, but what do I do if someone asks me a question and I don't know anything, or I don't know the answer?" I'm like, super easy. You're like, "You know what? I'm not sure about that, but I can tell you about this." And you bring in one of your stories that's most relevant. Another thing about this process is that a lot of times you're so worried about showcasing what I did. Really, when you're having that conversation, listen for what the challenges and the problems that the hiring manager or your manager or your team are telling you and try to speak to that because again, they have a problem. A problem is that they have a job opening, for example, and they're trying to fill it, and that's the problem. So you want to be able to bring solutions to their problems. So when you're in those conversations, tell story that showcase how you can solve their problem. And a lot of this is based on the Donald Miller, the story branding process. And Donald Miller always says, think of Star Wars where Luke is a hero and Yoda and Obi-Wan Kenobi are the guides. You want to put yourself as the guide that you are able to help the hero solve the problem. And that transforms your conversation and it really makes it about them. Same thing on your LinkedIn. LinkedIn is about you, but it's for the reader. So everything that you put on LinkedIn should resonate with the person that you're trying to help. So stories is a really good way for you to showcase your talents and your skills and become the problem solver.
I love that. I love that you brought in StoryBrand and Donald Miller, Rosie, because I definitely align and agree with how he shares that understanding and clarity too, right around on message. And you sharing that framework for how to approach those conversations is really helpful because we can apply that whether we are looking for that next promotion within our company, whether we're looking outside, and even in content, like you mentioned, posting on LinkedIn and having that content on LinkedIn. I would leverage that storytelling so you get the practice involved. And that way, when you are in any of those interview situations or situations where you're describing your impact, you already have those stories ready to go because you've shared them, you know them, and they're a part of you. I think it can be a little bit harder for folks when they're met with a question that they haven't come to yet. And your solution for that, being able to turn it back to another story, is a great way to navigate it smoothly without feeling the panic and the anxiety that I'm sure can ensue.
Absolutely. And then one last thing about that is if you happen to remember that question and you aren't in that hiring interview process, you can address it in the thank you email to the interviewer and say, hey, by the way, that way you kind of close the loop and you let them know that you remembered it and then you give them a solution. Of course, you'll have to do a little bit of research if you didn't know the answer to begin with, but closing the loop is really important.
That's great. I love that. And another option and opportunity that folks might not even consider too in that extra communication. I appreciate
Yes.
that extra example. I know we are coming to the end of our time, Rosie, and we could probably just continue on and on,
Yes.
but you want people to work with you because they can benefit from that one-on-one experience with you. And I want to make sure that the audience can reach out. So where can they find you online to benefit more from your wisdom and insight?
Yeah, so I'm very active on LinkedIn at Rosie Career Coaching or Rosie Zilinskas, but they can find me on my website, No Woman Left Behind, and woman is WOMAN, nowomanleftbehind.com, or they can email me at rosie at nowomanleftbehind.com.
Well, we will definitely have all those details down below. Rosie, you're welcome back anytime because I know we could talk about this for just hours on end. We won't do that.
Yeah.
But you're definitely welcome back as a guest. And to all of our audience, thank you so much for listening and tuning in. I hope you'll make that contact with Rosie and follow her and glean from more of her wisdom. Thank you for listening to Bad Bosses, Great Leaders. We'll catch you on the next episode. All right.